I read 14 books in 23 minutes, and today we're going to talk about this book right here, Indian Classical Dance, and I'm going to give you my 3 takeaways. Welcome back to 23-Minute Reads. This is kind of like my accountability vlog, because in these videos, I share with you my takeaways from my current read, which is this one right here. I'm reading 23 minutes per day, every day, as an action of self-love, as an investment in myself, and as a way of providing myself with some consistency in an ever-changing world. Hoping that you will join me along in this journey by dropping some comments down there in that comment section so that there's an actual dialogue going on. Having in mind that while I have several decades of experience as an educator, a curriculum writer, I am not the know-all, be-all for this book. I'm simply providing a space for dialogue. Well, this week I read, let me get my notes, I read the preface. I read the preface through page 44, and here are my 3 takeaways. Takeaway number 1 is Nationalist Movement. I decided to read this book, honestly, because I don't know, or rather, I wanted to learn more about dance forms and the cultures that are in India in and of itself. So this felt like a great way. It popped up on my Amazon feed, and I was like, go ahead and get that. Let me go ahead and get that book. And as I'm reading it, I'm better understanding how much I don't really know. And that's okay, because reading is a great way to find more. In the preface, we find these words, and I quote, "Traditional art forms are subject to cycles of growth, decay, and renewal. After centuries of being nurtured in the temple and the court, Indian dances suffered a reversal during colonial rule. They revived during the Nationalist Movement to start a dance renaissance in post-independence India," end quote. This reminded me of that post-colonial celebration of independence, nationalist movement in Ghana. We actually discussed this in one of our earlier books, African Dance in Ghana Contemporary Transformations, In that book, we were offered insight on President Nkrumah's intention and his desire to use traditional art forms as a platform, as a building space to build national pride, and how this intentional work brought a revival of sorts in the traditional dance forms. Based on the previous quote from the preface, I see that there was a similar traditional dance revival during the post-colonial nationalist movements in both India and Ghana. And that brings me a certain level of comfort as a dance educator. It brings me a certain level of comfort to know that the arts, I'm not just saying that the arts can build these senses of pride in our communities, but there's additional records and literature and spaces that also agree with that feeling that I'm having inside of my body. In a quick Google search, I also found that the post-colonial era of India was 1945 to about 1980, which is similar to that post-colonial space, that nationalist space in Ghana. So once again, seeing these ideas that you kind of think and kind of feel inside your body, and seeing that they are experienced outside of your body too. Takeaway number 2 is mediocrity. The preface of this book does an excellent job of setting the tone for the book, which is kind of like what a preface is supposed to do, but it's amazing in this book. It also makes some great points that I feel can be used universally. Here's one, and I quote, "The danger to classism comes not from differing opinions, but from the mediocrity and superficiality. Change for sake of change." Let's pull all of that back and try it again. Take 2. Here we go. The danger to classism comes not from differing opinions, but from mediocrity and superficiality. Change for the sake of being different cannot convey conviction. End quote. This quote stood out to me for two reasons. One, it invites us to revisit the ideas that we have around the term classism and classical to encompass more than just ancient Greece and ancient Rome. And second, the idea of change. In an earlier book, we discussed preservation versus conservation. In that video, for that previous book, conservation was described as a dynamic approach that allows traditional work to come into the present with relevancy while still holding on to its essence, right? So bringing that past into our present and allowing it to grow dynamically. A superficial and mediocre approach would say, oh, we need to change this thing. We need to leave those traditional dance forms because they're archaic and out of date. They're not relevant, right? That's what the mediocre, superficial approach would say. Someone with a deep understanding, however, would know how to use that form and innovate within that form to keep it relative to what's going on right now. In a simple, or maybe a better yet, more accessible comparison, I would say, if you understand the alphabet and you understand the phonetics and the words that are already being used and that are in existence, then a person can create new terms that speak to current issues, yet still abide by the rules of the alphabet and the phonetics. Does that make sense? Let me know in the comments below if I lost you with that one. Or let me know in the comments below if you're still with me. Takeaway number 2. Is that 2? I'm lying. That's takeaway number 3. We're at 3 already. Takeaway number 3 is contemporary classical. So first, what are your thoughts about the term contemporary classical? Let me know that in the comments below, because initially I felt like, how could something be contemporary and classical? How can it live in these seemingly opposing worlds at the same time? And then I thought back to this idea of the path of conservation, right? So continuing down that path of conservation that we mentioned earlier, and more specifically about relativity versus relevancy. Is it relative versus relevancy? So here's my question. Is something classical because it dates back to a specific year and time, or is it classic in relation to where we are right now? Here we go. Let me connect that back to the book so we stay in alignment. On page 11 of the book, we find these words. Bharatanatyam is amongst the oldest of the contemporary classical dances of India. Overwhelming literacy, architectural, and epigraphical evidence testifies to its antiquity. But the dance in its present form is not more than 200 years old, having a history in ancient Tamil culture, end quote. Present form. It's something that stood out in that quote to me as a reminder that the present form isn't always the same form of our grandparents, of our elders, or that of our ancestors, and yet it still shares the same essence. So the Paris Opera, there we go. The Paris Opera House has a series, or at the time of this recording, the Paris Opera House has a series that talks about classical ballet through the ages, which is really cool. Like if you're like me and you're a visual person, because there's a section where you see practitioners on stage representing different ages and time, but on stage at the same time, so that you can see them go through the movement and you can see how the forms has developed, how it's changed over the years. And I feel like this leads to the idea of the present form developing, how it develops, but how it differs from the past, but still shares that same essence. This is the first chapter of this book, and it journeys through the history, sometimes that dates all the way back to the 5th century AD, offering you political, social, and religious context for better understanding of Bharatanatyam and how it became this contemporary classical form that we have today. Now, I'm gonna be honest about my experience, and you can let me know what your experiences are. There were times that I had to do additional Google searches just to better understand vocabulary that was new to me. But once again, I chose this book because I wanted to experience something that would increase my knowledge and introduce me to new concepts. I'm still digesting everything that I read so far and would love to hear your ideas. So you can drop them in the comments below, or you could drop a book emoji or the word book just so that I know that you're here with me. Or better yet, you could even drop the title of a book as a suggestion for what I should read next. Remember to like and subscribe if you like this video or found it interesting in any other kind of way. My name is Maya D. This has been 23-Minute Reads. Stay blessed, spread a good word, and see you again soon.